Okay.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. It fits like a glove, the perfect pairing of light and design. My name is Brandy Geno. I'm a design strategist, and I would like to welcome my guest, Ahmed, David, Fayez, Engineer Amar, and Peter. Thank you all for joining. So I'll go ahead and get right into it. Yay! Thank you. I should have looked at this quarter. What do you think is the most important element in pairing design and functionality to create a space that feels cohesive?
Can I just say quickly, by the sound of the audience behind us, groupies, lighting groupies, is probably
my favourite too. Yeah.
They're here for somebody. Who?
The most important element is for me, to start with a space and to realize that great design is a collaboration and to leave your ego at the door. And every now and then you get to work on just the most special project where everybody brings total commitment. And I mean, I've got several, but one in particular, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Mumbai International Airport, amazing. You know, everybody just got emotionally involved in the project. The other interesting elephant in the room is how soon to engage a lighting designer. Because, and this is many a conversation I've had with architects, because the earlier you engage a lighting designer is when you give the magic the chance to happen. Then you can start integrating light into the architecture. So suddenly you have wonderful lighting effects. The light's in the space, but you're not necessarily realizing where the lights come from.
I'll add one more point to that. It's important to understand that we are designing for humans, and we're not designing for lux levels, wattages, and things that sometimes people get carried away with. It's very important to understand that we are designing for the human eye to see what the perceived, what is the space going to be perceived like? How do you want to make that connection? How do you want to make the impression on the visitors to the space? So the lighting designers or any designer should be given the freedom to design for the humans and not be bound by specifics like wattages or lux levels or things like that.
I would say that because you've got the word cohesive in your question, it's important that we're all getting the same brief, getting the same narrative. What are the buzzwords? What makes this project special? What does the client want? And how do we, as a team, interpret that into lighting solutions and what have you? Because at the end of the day, we're one of many consultants, and we have to be in agreement to produce a cohesive design.
So I'm going to ask you a question now, Ahmed, since you didn't answer that one. When does function take priority over creativity, and how do you decide?
Both of them are very important, like functionality and creativity. We need to look at it at what the space is for, and sometimes we go with functionality if it's really important. Like, for example, if we're working for a hospital, and you work in, let's say, in an operation room, definitely would like to have enough light, and there will be more, the lux level there will going to be more important than being creative. You can be creative with them, for example, with the product they're using, the technology you're using, but here we go with functionality. On the other hand, when we're talking about residential, functionality is less than this. I want to say less important, but it's you're going to look at the creativity more there. So first we need to look at the space, and then we can decide this is like we'll go with functional and or creative. But both of them are like important that we need to do that. When something like wayfinding, we talk about like a workspace in terms of like working in offices for a long time, so people don't be fatigued. When looking at in specific light, we need to look at the color temperature and the lux level here. But when we go to working as I say, for example, hospitality, but we need to be more creative and taking consideration and functionality as well, looking for use the right specification in terms of color temperature, as I mentioned earlier, and it goes. So we cannot just say, okay, we're going to go creative, we're going to be functional. So both of them are important. So we can.
I think it's really, I know we just jumped into this, but I think that lighting design is so important, and a lot of people don't even think about it, and they don't even think that there's special designers that are specifically working in lighting. It's very important for our mental health. I mean, it's been proven in research. It's better to have like lamps, candles, all of these things instead of the blaring overhead lights. It affects neurology, and our neurology, and it's quite important.
Definitely. I mean, let's take one example of, say, the hospital. Highlight when you start lighting a hospital, the waiting room is different than the corridors, and different than the patient room. Like, for example, in the corridor is not only for the patients. Like when you take the people from the room to the operation room, you shouldn't have kind of like direct light on the patient when he walk in the corridor. I mentioned that earlier. Like one of the very important places in the hospital is the waiting room. So you're either waiting to hear a news from the doctor that could be very bad, or the family are sitting there again. So the room should be well lit, no glare, no direct light on the for the people. It should be a bit comfortable.
How did you all even get into lighting design?
It's really interesting for me because I'm from a theatrical family. And I was training to be an actor. And I realized that I'd be poor for the rest of my life. Found the light, followed the light. And it's coming from the theatre, film and television industry, being able to visualize light and look for the story has really helped me as an architectural lighting designer. And light is all around us. I mean, I'll get impressed by a clear blue sky and the green leaves and shadow. Film noir, a style of film, very iconic lighting. Just anywhere and everywhere there's light. And once it gets you, literally, I promise you I will never retire because I can't walk away from it. And the lighting's much better here this year than it was last year.
What about you all? How did you get into lighting design?
Well, actually, it was a coincidence. I did my last year at university. I will say that I had only last semester. I had only 2 subjects, so I had 3 days off, and I was looking for a company to be an intern instead of just sitting doing nothing in these 3 days. And by coincidence, I found this company. It was a lighting distributor, and I worked for free for I think it was for 4 months. And then after I finished, they hired me, and the life goes on. I did my master's degree in lighting design, and it keeps going now. So.
For me, I started in architectural engineering, and lighting was one of the options in the architectural engineering department. And the first thing that really caught my attention was when I was a junior or second year in university, I would see the 4th and 5th year students working on the DMX systems at that time, color changing, and the computer modeling. And I was amazed how you can use technology to create light and to control the light. And the more I learned about it, I understood it's not just using technology to control light, but you use light to control people, to guide people, to change the atmosphere. And that just got me really into lighting. So finished my degree in architectural engineering with a specialization in lighting, moved forward to do a master's in lighting design. And after that, just started working in lighting ever since.
Very interesting.
I studied product design, and I designed a light fitting for kids that when they go to sleep, the eyes close and the mouth goes closed and you wake up. And I won an award with it. Well, it's a second place in the award. And then I had to do a year out as part of my degree. And so I did this business card, say lighting designer, because I designed a light. I thought I was a lighting designer. And someone said, no, you do know what a lighting designer is, Peter? I said, I had no idea, tell me. And they told me, well, that sounds much better. How do I get into that? And that started my journey.
That's very interesting.
What is interesting there is I don't have a master's. I have a lifetime in lighting. I have a bachelor degree in stage lighting. And it seems to be now that the entry to lighting for young lighting designers is to have a master's. And then they come to us and they've got no practical experience whatsoever, and they think they're up there, and in terms of their skills and value to the organisation, they're much lower down in the hierarchy. And as lighting design director of Daria over the past year and a half, I've got to look at the CVs of some of the great and the good of our industry, legends, giants, and you'll be amazed at how many of them are just doing it, but they're doing it on a bachelor's degree, not a master's. And it's a conversation that I've had with other lighting designers, with the ILP, Institution of Lighting Professionals, where I sit on the technical committee. Can't we introduce something like a lighting apprenticeship? Can't we just take young talent and have them working alongside us and sort of train them and send them on courses and so on and so forth? How did it get? You know, I'm in architectural lighting by accident because the British film industry went downhill in 1990s. You're a product designer, so you're here by accident. You found the light, but you weren't thinking, I'm going to be a lighting designer. And now, how's it that we can't just accidentally become a lighting designer anymore?
I feel like it's this way a lot with our field in design. We always branch off to other disciplines somehow or another.
We studied a couple of years ago in our company of 48 people. Only 20% of them have qualifications in lighting design. The rest are an amazing mix.
It's very niche. So,
Yeah.
Peter, you were talking about the word you won for the Kids Light. What role do you think design plays in shaping the user behavior and interaction within a space, and how do you approach that within your work?
I think for me, it's an emotional thing. So we're trying to create an emotional response when someone enters a space, let's say an interior space. And do we want them to relax and stay a while, or do we want them to hurry up and go make room for the next person? That's up. We can control their behaviour in that way. We can highlight textures. We can curate with light. Say we want you to look at this. We may even say we want you to touch this. Look at this texture that you wouldn't have been aware of if we hadn't highlighted it with light. We can control lighting controls and change the mood of a space. I mean, there's data to suggest that in a restaurant environment, if you dim the lights, people will eat more, or it allows people to eat that would be inhibited, things like that. So it's a very important role for me.
That's a great thing, texture and light, because the moment you've got texture and light, people want to touch it. And the moment they've touched it, they've made an emotional connection with the space. You know, there's just the psychology of it is amazing.
What do you think is one of the key aspects of design and how often they get overlooked but can significantly affect how a space is experienced?
Sorry, who are you asking that?
Anybody who wants to answer.
Can you say it again and I'll have a go?
I said, what do you think is one of the key aspects of design that often gets overlooked but can significantly affect how a space is experienced?
I would say slow design, because the denominator on most projects that we work on seems to be time and money. And in a lot of those cases, the human-centric side and great design is overlooked. So that's what I'd say. And just something made me chuckle yesterday. I was listening to a talk on sustainability, and someone in California has designed student accommodation that's very, very ticks all the sustainable goals, but 70% of the student accommodation doesn't have a window. And that's just wrong on so many levels. That's not an inspiring space to study. And I actually stayed in a hotel, and this is what I love about design. I stayed in a hotel in Stockholm once, and my room didn't have a window. But what I loved about it, and God bless interior designers, it had curtains. So I opened the curtains to look at the wall, not a window. So there's a connection that we have with natural light, and you've got to design holistically and not just look at any one aspect of design. Yeah, of course, sustainability is important, but at the expense of the health and well-being in the space.
How do we have slow design when we're in a place like Saudi, where it's always the Saudi timeline?
Well, you have slow design by having sometimes we need to take a breath, put our foot on the brake, and just slow it down.
I think, David, I would touch on a word you said, the human-centric design. I think it's very important, as I said earlier, that we are designing for humans, and we have to always remember that, because in those projects where we have to work fast, a lot of times the new buzzwords like sustainability become much more important. Everybody wants to hit LEED silver, LEED gold, and forgetting that how the humans will react to that space. There are spaces where people are maybe not used to going in very low light levels in certain areas. We're doing public areas for any large project, and to do it sustainably, you have to be around 30 lux or below, and the street lights outside are at 50 lux on the streets. So it just doesn't make sense sometimes, but we always have to think about the surroundings of the space we are in, what's surrounding us, how are we going to be compared to everything else. Yes, if you're building in the desert, I totally agree. You take it down to 1 lux and I'll be happy with that. But if you're in the middle of a city that's very bright, sustainability cannot take over things, otherwise things will become uncomfortable for people to live in. Same example as having a room without a window. It's not just the lux levels or the controllability, but there's a human aspect to it. Who would want to live 9 months as a student in a room without a window? So it's very important that we look at the human factor when designing.
Mind you, that room would have probably got me to study.
Every project should be sustainable in one way or another. And sometimes you feel like as a new trend it comes and becoming like the words now. For example, sustainable. And then they move to human-centric. You'll hear it, and I'm talking about lighting when it comes to design. And then after that comes the dark skies. They want dark sky just like maybe 20 kilometers outside of the city. When you go inside the city, it's fully polluted. I think we should do the balance between everything. So that's how I look at it.
So I think it's important to say that since we are talking about lighting design, but we're not just talking about lighting design, we're talking about the impacts it has on well-being. What is the relationship, do you all think, between design, lighting design, and well-being? And how can designers ensure that the spaces that you're creating impact those who are actually using them?
That's sometimes down to the client. So if you've been lucky enough to work on a Google project or Apple, and you see how well space is designed, and they want the best out of people. And even now trends, even say office lighting, we have creative space, we have contemplative space, we have, just get our head down and workspace. And that we realise that the needs are different. We realise that some of the best ideas happen by the coffee machine. as opposed to in a breakout room. So it's a little bit like Field of Dreams. You know, it's just creating the right environment wherever you are. On the sustainability thing, I just wish it was less tick box. I wish it was genuine. There was good, smart, joined up, holistic thinking, and I can think of so many examples that I don't know. They'll lighting's a small part of it, and then they'll fly a $50,000 desk from Italy, and it's just nonsense. Spaces that we don't go back and look at. They're overlit. It could be dimmed down or switch some of the lights off. You know, no, it just, I don't know. I wish it was less tick box.
We need to look at, what we're designing, whether it was an office, whether it was, a residential or hospitality. Another thing, we cannot just bring something that's been done in another place and we need to implement it here exactly the same. Like what's working in Europe might not work here in the region. I'll give a small example. We grew up in the fluorescent lamp. So it was the norm. Everybody has a fluorescent lamp at the house, and it was over maybe 5,000 K. Now we're changing. We're trying to tell them, let's go to 2,700 because this is better for the, sleeping and make relax at night and all of that. And they see it is too much. No, we don't want, because actually the 2,700 was only used in the toilets, but we can go up to 3,000 sometimes to the houses when 3,500. But we need to talk to the client. We need to educate them. This is why it's better for you to use it. And then when we go, we do the offices. We don't have to go to the 6,000 K. We can go to 4,000, 3,500. And now actually I did offices with 3,000. In some areas for executive, I can put it 2,700 because, it's not like there's so much work in that area.
It's a real interesting thing that you've just said, because I actually had a row with an Australian lighting designer over an article in Tokyo. They're using blue light to stop suicides on the metro. So on a psychological level, the blue light is calming. And he wrote, blue light never makes you relax. And what he's talking about is a physiological, how blue light affects our sleep and one thing and another. So clearly it does. If it's stopping suicides on Tokyo Metro on a psychological level, it works. And it's the same with red. Red's great for us with our sleep patterns and one thing and another, but can sometimes invoke the fight or flight mechanism. So that interesting thing between psychology and physiology. That's easy for me to say.
I think for me, the well-being, I never feel as good as when I'm outside. And I'm unlikely to go outside right now because it's too hot for me. So the next best thing is to bring the outside in. Obviously glazing, don't go to those rooms that David was talking about. But the great psychological benefit, people are more productive if they work next to a window than if they work deep into a building. So how do we as lighting designers help? Obviously, if we're day lighting specialists, that's great. But if not, we can feel the psychological benefit of artificial lighting that mimics day lighting as close as possible. There are manufacturers there that produce light fittings that really look like daylight, not just because they're cool white, but there's more sophistication than that, and that's a nice thing. So you fake it if you have to. I just went on hall 4, I think, to a manufacturer of planting, and it looked real. I thought, this is lovely. Is it real? No, it's not. But it fooled me. And I was asking her what are the psychological benefits, and said, well, you felt they were really good until I said they were fake. I thought, well, yeah, I did. So if you walk into a space and you believe it's daylight or believe it's a real tree, it has benefits for me anyway, and I presume for others as well.
So that goes into my next question. I'm sure that everybody's wondering, whenever you're hired to do projects and you all come from very diverse backgrounds, when did they bring you all in? Are they bringing you in when they've already thought of what the plans are? Or did they bring you in to help with the strategy? Do they bring you in and you get to decide everything yourself?
I just think that depends on the relationships between lighting designers and architects, lighting designers and clients, where you are in the world. I've done a hell of a load of projects in India, and the building's usually long since established before a lighting designer's got involved. So that's sometimes cultural.
So it's always different.
Yeah, relationships. But you can. I've seen some beautiful projects by Bofils Architects in Spain and a company called 380-750, and you can see the harmony between light and architecture, and you just wish that you had that relationship with an architect, because honestly, it's sublime, it's poetic, it's wonderful.
I think we can't be involved too early. Even if it's too early for us to say, hey, here's the lighting concepts, we can get the vibe of what's happening in the project, what the priorities for architects.
Do you need to see the room to be inspired?
Yeah, maybe. But it's just nice to see what's going on. I've got a project in Dubai, and half of me is getting impatient because I can't start work yet. But the other half of me that is patient is enjoying seeing what the architect's doing and what their priorities are, because they've got their brief from the client. And therefore, I'm getting, I feel at one with the team, even though I'm not actually producing anything yet.
But here's the other really interesting thing. Our program usually runs back to back with the architects. So let's say there's a 16-week concept period. He's massing the building, and we're usually doing our magic squeezed in with terrible deadlines in the last 3-4 weeks of the project. And I still don't know why that's a lesson that we've never learned, that we don't offset the programs, give the architects the chance to do their work. There'll be some integration and collaboration for sure, but we end up crammed into the corner of the same program.
I think the more interesting question would be, when do we think that we should be involved in a project? And I think once we have a concept ready, that's when a lighting designer should really be on board. Once the architecture concept is solid and it's frozen, because we'll be able to add to it from that time on, instead of coming on when they're starting detailing or they're far ahead in the schematic design. I think that's too late for the lighting designer to come to do anything with an impact. So I think as soon as a concept is done by the architect, it's the right time for a lighting designer to get engaged. And a lot of times the ideas of the client are very important. We've been on projects where the client really wanted projection lighting for special days and festival days on the building, but the building facade was all glass, and we had to sit with the architect and design something that will allow for that projection to work and to look realistic. So I think that just after the concept design of the architecture is done is the right time to involve lighting designers.
Whenever you all are, obviously you've done projects in many countries around the world, how do you have to approach every country differently?
Yes.
Think globally, design locally.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because when you go to the East countries, if you design like Japan, Singapore, even India, people prefer cooler light. People prefer to have more very equal levels of lighting everywhere. They don't like the very strong highlights. If you go to the West, it's totally opposite. People like to have dark rooms with highlights onto certain areas. So you have to be aware of what the culture is and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And also you have to be aware of what the surrounding is where you're lighting. So if you're lighting in the Gulf, for example, as I said, the street lighting levels are very high. So if you're designing anything, a facade next to a street light, your lux levels have to be higher. You have to use higher power fittings. And it's very different if you're designing in Europe, where the light trespass is much more important. And you have to make sure that everything is within your boundaries. So you have to be very aware of where you're designing and who you're designing for.
Yeah, knowing the culture is very important. As I mentioned earlier, it's like you don't just copy and paste. I mean, in terms of lighting, I remember one incident of a friend of mine is a lighting designer who was working in a project here, and they did a concept. The company was international, and they wanted to do a concept of lighting. And one of the places they introduced, the incandescent lamp, like a cable, and with incandescent lamp to put it. It's to give kind of like a festive, but the client said no immediately, and kind of I know what's because maybe now it's changed a bit, but before like we only use these in two occasions, like outside, if there is like a wedding in the house, they put that somebody's getting married, or if somebody died, and actually you can differentiate between both of those. Like okay, both you have lamps. How would you know if that was a wedding or a funeral? So when it's a wedding, you will have the full line. But if it was a funeral, you're going to remove some of the light. So you know this is the house of the people go and somebody died to give your condolences. So this culture, you need to know about the small details about it. You should know.
Sorry, it just reminded me of another story. I was once reviewing a design for one of the big international designers who had come to one of the Gulf countries. And they were designing queuing areas in one of the places that they were working on. And they had those in-ground spotlights that are colorful in-ground spots lighting up for places where people are going to stand. And the first thing when I looked at it, I said, do you realize that we wear white thobe? And as soon as we start standing over there, all the men are going to look like lanterns. This is not going to work in this environment. So you have to be aware of where you're designing and who you're designing for.
This is really interesting. I never really thought about lighting or lighting design being part of like culture or cultural diplomacy. It's quite interesting.
I did a I did a Chinese restaurant in London once, and we lit it with white lights. And the chef, who's from Beijing, said, no, can't do this, can't do this. I said, why not? And says, well, because white in Chinese culture represents funerals and death, just like black does in Europe. So let's have less white light. Obviously, we had to light the tables with white light because nobody wants coloured food or coloured faces. But elsewhere, we got to it with filters and introduced subtle colour. We didn't give them Las Vegas, but that saved our skin, right?
Interesting what you were saying about India and the cool white light, because I've done a lot of work in Scandinavia, and it's always warm. The warm end of the spectrum. It's cold outside, never specified anything cool. But also in India, there's kind of a juxtaposition because you get families living together. So the young and the old, and they have different lighting needs. The older people want brighter, whiter, crisper light. The eyesight's probably depreciated a little. And the children want warmer, more cozy atmosphere, and sort of creating space where you can balance that. Fortunately, we have the technology to do that, and in some cases that's where the young hang out and that's where the old hang out, so it's totally different design space, but very interesting.
I think it's safe to say nobody does lighting design like Scandinavia.
I've only once in my whole career been asked to design in a European style, and I did a floor of Macy's in New York, and they wanted it European style, and that's the only time. You're always jumping into where you are and trying to capture it. And I was listening to someone talk, and albeit as a landscape architect, and there was loads of students in the room. And I say not everything we do in life is measured in dollars. He had a different way of putting it. He said, this is the part you don't get paid for. And it's trying to find the soul of the project, trying to find the narrative, trying to capture whatever it is that you can show that in light. And in real terms, it means you look at every project with fresh eyes. You don't overlay what you did on the last one. But for me, that is absolutely essential, that you try and capture the soul of the project.
So I'm going to ask one last question. It's an open question for everybody to answer, and then if anybody in the audience has questions, we'll take those. So our closing question is, What is one question every designer should ask themselves before starting a new project to ensure that their design truly serves its purpose?
I think what David just says is you've got to make sure you haven't got your preconceptions because every project's different. And then the second thing is, I know you asked for one on the cheat. Have I asked the right questions? So do I know this project? Do I know what the requirements are before I start designing?
I think you mentioned earlier that did I get the right brief from the client? So I worked in a project and I started everything. When I did the presentation, I found that the client was not really happy about that because actually he didn't give me like enough information. And then after we sat and we talked and everything, and I did it, and he was happy. Yeah, you need to get the brief from whether it was one person or you have multiple stakeholders. You should ask yourself, did I get the right brief for the project or not?
I think the one question I would think of is, would my role be noticeable to people when they come to the space? Would they feel comfortable? Would they feel that this was thought of when it was designed? Because for me, the human perception of the space is important, but people should know the difference, or people will know the difference between a space that's designed correctly and a space that's just randomly lights are put up. And that's the one thing I want to know at the end of each project is, would people notice that there was effort put into this to design it correctly?
In some parts of the world, will I get paid? But I see it, having sat reviewing other lighting designers' work, I've seen at the rear that we've sometimes had square pegs in round holes because we haven't written the brief or the scope of works very well. And that's something, really understand the scope and the brief, ask questions. And there are sometimes grey areas and, I don't know, black holes to fall into. And generally, I just generally live with it, but let the client know that I'm living with it. And that's a good way to keep clients.
So everybody who knows me knows I talk about design diplomacy all the time. I'm adding lighting diplomacy now to this. I know I learned I'm a design strategist and I've learned a lot about lighting today, so I hope everybody else did too. Does anybody have any questions for our guest?
Great panel, but we've hardly scratched the surface, trust me.
Will you give him this microphone? This guy behind you. Will you give him your microphone? Give him your microphone. The guy with the white shirt. Thank you.
Interview certainly, all right.
Hello, this is Mohammed Saleh from Trica LED. The question is, Ammar just mentioned that during the design process, they consider the requirements from different communities, different countries. Like some countries, they like brighter than the others. Some communities, they like the dimmer, warmer light than the others. So, but you as a lighting designer, you have to design as per a certain, and to comply as per a certain design standard, whether it is CIBSI, IES, CIE, and so on. So how would you go around it, and how you justify it if the requirements from the client is contradicting what the standard says?
I think at the end of the day, it's who pays you, right? If I'm paid by a client, I will do what the client wants. The specifications, or that's why the IES calls their guidelines, or it's a guideline, it's a recommendation. It's not a law that you follow. You always have chance to deviate from it, depending on what your client wants, depending on what scenario is going on in the space where you're designing. So you don't always have to follow everything to the dot. You have space to maneuver around it. And I don't think that's really an issue in most of the places. Most of the time, you can come to a middle ground between what the recommendation is and what the client wants. A lot of time, it requires a lot of education to the client. You have to educate the client about what you're doing and why certain things are recommended and what are the benefits that they're going to get out of it.
Well, maybe this is what you're saying is right. I mean, if you are designing, let's say, a villa or a palace for a certain client, so you have to do what the client wants. But if you are designing an office building, okay, an office building, of course, you have to go as per what the standard says. I mean, you cannot, they cannot tell you we need certain level on this in the office, and or let's say, and we need certain color temperatures.
Yeah, I think that's where the education part comes. You have to educate the clients. Why are you following these recommendations? I don't think you're a good designer if you're following recommendations that you don't believe in. If you believe in it and you know that this is recommendation should be followed, then you should be able to explain it to the client and convince them why he should follow these recommendations. But I think in a lot of the places around the world, education is very important. We've seen it in the Gulf areas a lot, especially when doing villas. Educating the client is almost 25% of our job as lighting designers. It's just sitting with the client and explaining to them why are we doing things in a certain way. Why don't I want to put 50 meters of a strip light on one driver? Why do they have to pay more for better quality, and how it's going to work?
Thank you.
I'm partly responsible for Dubai International Airport T3. It's what the client wanted. But by the same token, when you arrive in Mumbai International Airport, at the arrivals, the lighting's beautiful. I don't imagine I could have done a better job myself. All the light is where you want it on the baggage carousel, but it's poetic. It's like a hug and a kiss from India when you arrive. And the client really wanted to change it. He must have visited Dubai. And I stuck up for Howard Branston, who, God rest his soul, in New York. I defended his design and made Mumbai International keep this beautiful design because it was the right thing to do. And, you know, you try and educate, but you can't always be responsible for the desires of your clients.
I can add something. As Amar mentioned, education and awareness is very important. Not only for professional, even talking about the people, like the normal people. I give small, education about lighting on my social media. And the funny thing is that I was talking in different topics, and I was once walking with a friend of mine. It's like he's in mid-50s. He has nothing to do with lighting, and we were in a hotel, and suddenly I found him stop. He's looking at something. And told him, what's going on? Why are you looking? He said, this is wrong. I said, why it's wrong? He said, you see, there is like a spotlight and there is a picture light on the picture, creating shadow. I looked at him like, how, So he's following me, knowing this kind of small tips I give, but they get awareness out of it. And then when you talk to them, because this end user, they're the one who's going to agree on what they want to do about the lighting, not only the professionals. So awareness and education is the key.
An interesting thing. What's the difference between a lighting designer and a light artist? And a cynic would say that a light artist earns 4 times the fee for a quarter of the responsibility. But I say that lighting designers are light artists too. I've done a lot of light art, but the difference between me and a light artist is my light art is always within the context of the project, whereas a light artist is art for art's sake. Now, I love illuminated jellyfish. I would put a light art jellyfish on every one of my projects if I could. But unless I've got an aquarium, a fish shop, or a zoo. That's not going to happen. So I'm planting the seed here. Anyone that wants to join Team Jellyfish, wants a jellyfish on their project,